Be my date to the dance?
Be my date to the dance? Her voice broke through the sound of crystal chandeliers and white tablecloth talk like a record scratch in a jazz club. Everyone in the big ballroom turned their heads, shocked into stillness. Zariah Moore stood with her tray in one hand and her courage in the other. She wore a neat black uniform. She stared at the man sitting alone at the corner table. He was an older man with a fine suit, a chiseled jawline, and an empty sleeve where an arm used to be. He was just as shocked as the people around him. You could almost hear the air getting thicker. A black waiter had just asked a one-armed stranger to dance in this five-star hotel in Charleston, South Carolina, where money and power flowed from every champagne flute. And the way she asked made it sound like the most normal thing in the world. Zariah had been embarrassed earlier that night. As she walked by, two women in sequined gowns giggled. "Smells like drugstore perfume," one of them said with a sneer. "Her uniform probably costs less than my nail polish," the other person said with a laugh. She had been taught how to smile through it. Smile even when others ignore you, touch you without permission, or give you tips that feel more like charity than kindness. But this wasn't the first time someone tried to make her feel less important, and it wouldn't be the last. But what made tonight different was him. The guy in the corner. He hadn't made fun of her, hadn't even looked up when the laughs started. He merely kept looking at the dance floor, calm and far away. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. She then walked over. My heart was pounding like gospel drums. The tray she was holding shook just enough to spill if she wasn't cautious. And she said it. "Be my date to the dance?" That's how this black story started. No one in that room, including Zariah, knew that the man she had just asked to dance was Lucian Voss, the millionaire CEO of one of the biggest biotech companies in the US. A guy who had lost his left arm in a lab accident that no one wanted to talk about. A man who was worth $3.4 billion and hadn't danced in 10 years. A man who hadn't been seen in public without his close friends in almost 2 years. He stared at her for a long time. Then he got up and gave him his only hand. "Go ahead," he said. The ballroom turned sideways in an instant. This isn't just a narrative about love. It's a story about respect, about being defiant, about seeing a person's soul before their wounds. This is hidden value. If this moment made you feel something, stay. The deeper this story develops, the more it tells us that love doesn't follow rules, and worth isn't always clear. Before that night in the ballroom and before her name became popular on social media, Zariah Moore was just another face in a service uniform, graceful, professional, and unnoticeable. She had been at the Belvedere Grand Hotel for 8 months, long enough to know that rich people rarely looked you in the eye, and even longer to learn how to live in a world that thought being nice was a sign of weakness. People remembered Zariah when she was 25, but they didn't know why. It wasn't simply how she looked, though her skin was silky and mocha-toned. Her cheekbones were high and caressed by God, and her eyes were the color of fresh earth after rain. Depending on how long her shift was, her hair was always in tidy braids or a smooth bun. No matter how tired her feet were, her uniform was always ironed, her collar was always buttoned, and her shoes were always spotless. Her smile, though, is what made her stand out. That smile had been around longer than most individuals have lived. People passed through Zariah's neighborhood in Columbia, South Carolina, but never stopped there. That's where she grew up. Laverne, her mom, worked in the school cafeteria and would hum old Anita Baker songs while packing lunchboxes, even when the power went out. When she was 9, her dad went missing. No goodbye, just the last gasp of a vehicle taillight fading down the street. That didn't stop her. Zariah was the first person in her family to go to college, a complete scholarship to study journalism at a state institution 2 hours away from home. She had always wanted to be a reporter, but not the sort who reads off a teleprompter. She wanted to be the kind that finds the truth in places people forget. But life had other ideas. Her mom got sick in the middle of her junior year, cancer of the colon. Step 3. Zariah gave up everything, her classes, her goals, and her lease. She went back home and got 3 jobs to pay for her chemo treatments, which Medicaid barely helped with. She got rid of her laptop, wrote down notes by hand. To buy groceries, I taught kids math. Zariah's scholarship had run out, Her credits were frozen, and the debt collectors were hovering like vultures by the time her mother went into remission. So she sent in an application to the Belvedere Grand. It was only meant to be transitory, just long enough to save money and maybe apply to school again. But transitory had a strange way of getting thinner when costs piled up and the world kept on without stopping. Zoraya never let bitterness get the best of her, though. Even though she couldn't afford a tiara, she acted like a queen. She spoke to guests with the same affection she would have used with her mother. She knew how to read a room, how to leave when things got tense, and how to smile just long enough to make people feel important, even if they didn't do the same for her. She didn't drink, not smoking. She only swore when she stubbed her toe or smacked her funny bone on the walk-in fridge. She sent part of her paycheck home every week. She went to see her mom every weekend, and brought soup and used magazines. They would sit on the porch and speak about old music, old dreams, and fresh starts. Zoraya had been thinking lately that maybe beginnings weren't for individuals like her. The people who stayed at the Belvedere made it apparent that your skin color, where you lived, and how much money you made, all decided how much you were worth. She had heard what people said. "You talk so well. You're too pretty to work here. I didn't think you would be that calm." She was worn out, not simply in her legs or back, but fatigued in a manner that only few women can comprehend. Women who grin even when they are being treated badly. Women who help others while their own goals slowly die. Women who know what it means to go anyway. Zoraya still had hope, though. Maybe it was a little too trusting. It could have been faith. Maybe it was tenacity that came from a line of women who had never been able to give up. That night, after being embarrassed in front of people and taking one more insult like it was part of her work, Zoraya observed a man sitting alone in the shadows of affluence. One arm, no grin, no pride, nothing except quiet. She saw herself in him, not in how they seem, but in how lonely they are. In strength that is quiet. That's why she walked over, and she asked, "Will you go to the dance with me?" She had no idea who he was. She only knew that he looked like he hadn't danced in a very long time. And maybe, just maybe, someone needed to tell him how to do it. Lucien Voss didn't belong in a ballroom anymore. He used to be the kind of guy who lived for fancy parties. The limelight found him easily. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall, had sharp cheekbones, fine suits, and a jawline that made magazine editors fight over him. For almost 10 years, his face was on the covers of Wired, GQ, and Forbes. He was a modern American success story. He started with nothing, developed an empire, and shattered every record on the stock market before he turned 30. But tonight he sat quietly in the corner, alone, watching others laugh too loudly over too many martinis and crystal glasses clink. He was different now, a heaviness behind his blue-gray eyes. He held himself still. There used to be confidence, but now there was something more like armor. 2 years ago, Lucien lost his left arm in an explosion in a lab. Few people know the whole story. He didn't merely have an accident in the lab. He made a choice. He was trying out a prototype for a neural-controlled prosthetic limb, which could one day help people who have lost limbs feel things again. A system that could actually turn thoughts into actions. The technology was groundbreaking. What's the risk? Even more so. Everyone told him to let the engineers take care of it. But Lucien wasn't the kind of CEO who worked in a glass tower. He thought that if you wanted to make anything that would transform people's lives, you had to feel the stakes in your own bones. He offered to take the test. The explosion blew off much of his arm from the shoulder down as the system broke down. The next day, the media frenzy changed from young genius billionaire to broken prodigy. Investors were scared. Prices of stocks went up and down. Lucien stopped being in the public eye. But the world didn't know that the accident didn't kill him. It just got rid of the noise. The kiss-ups. The investors who simply cared about the figures. The board members who grinned while circled like sharks behind the scenes. Lucien reconstructed, in a quiet way, more powerful, more intelligent. He made Vostech a private corporation again. Stop working with those who are only out for their own benefit. Put even more effort into coming up with new ideas. He put money into trauma facilities, rehabilitation clinics, and cheap prosthetics all around the country. Not because it looked good on paper, but because he knew what it was like to lose something and have to start over. He wasn't meant to be at the Belvedere Grand tonight. He loathed things like this now. Phony chuckles, hollow talks, and never-ending judgment. But Eli, his closest advisor, had begged him. Eli had remarked, "You need to start being seen again, not for the business, for you." So Lucian came, dressed in a tuxedo. He slipped into the shadows of the ballroom, sipping sparkling water and avoiding discussions. People stared. They did all the time. At the sleeve, right below his shoulder. At the spot where a limb used to be. At the man who used to be the definition of power, but now, at least in their views, is less. Lucian, on the other hand, didn't flinch. He didn't need them to say he was right. He had made himself twice, once with both hands and once with just one. And then she showed up. He saw her before she saw him, not because of her outfit or her tray, but because she was there. She moved easily across the room, balancing glasses and looks. The smile on her face wasn't just pleasant, it was trained, unwavering, and quietly rebellious. Lucian had met enough strong people to know what real strength looked like. She wore it like perfume. It was light, but impossible to miss. He observed people make fun of her, saw how her shoulders become stiff, yet her face stayed calm. That type of strength, that wasn't taught. That was real life. And then she went up to him, looked him right in the eyes, and spoke the last thing he thought he'd ever hear in a place like this. "Will you be my date to the dance?" Lucian blinked. Was she for real? She had no idea who he was. Didn't care. She didn't want a picture of herself. She wasn't making connections. She was just looking at him. Nobody had done that in a long time. Because of this, he stood up. And for the first time in a long time, he let someone else take charge. As the evening settled into its exquisite pace, the music slowed down. There was a lot of champagne. Waiters topped up glasses again. Laughter shone under crystal chandeliers. But Zariah didn't laugh. She had just finished cleaning table 7 again. A bunch of business ladies in their 40s who were equally dripping with diamonds and contempt. Zariah had given them polite service, a calm attitude, and her trademark grin. And in return, she got sarcastic spitback. One of them said, "Do they let anyone in here now?" without having to drop her voice. "Isn't this a charity gala, not a diversity hire mixer?" Another person said, looking straight at Zariah. The third person said, "Honey, can you get me another glass of Prosecco, and next time maybe iron your apron?" Zariah stopped in the middle of a step. She had heard things like this before, coded, chilly, and meant to remind her of her place. But something in her changed tonight. It could have been tiredness. It could have been pride. Maybe it was the quiet man in the corner who didn't look at her like she was invisible. She heard the last jab as she turned to leave. She probably thinks she fits in here. That smile says ambition, but those shoes say Section 8. Zariah didn't stop walking even though the tray shook in her hand. She went into the service hallway, leaned against the cold marble wall, and let out a calm, quiet breath. 5 times. Breathe in grace. Let go of your anger. She had her mantras. She had her shield. Armor, on the other hand, breaks. And just when she believed this night would be like all the others, when she would serve those who would never realize her worth, a voice spoke, deep, calm, and hard to ignore. "Are you all right?" She raised her head. Lucian Voss stood there, his wide figure just inches from her. His neat suit was a little creased from sitting alone for hours. He put his good hand on the wall gently. But his eyes didn't show any of the pity she typically saw from individuals like him. They were worried, real worry. "And one more thing, fire." He answered, "I saw what they said." Zariah swallowed. She was used to ignoring it, telling people, "It's okay" all the time. But she didn't lie tonight. "It happens," she remarked in a gentle voice. "It shouldn't," he said. They were quiet for a moment. The commotion in the ballroom faded away, like static in the background of another universe. Lucian looked back to her after looking over his shoulder. He said, "You're the only real person I've met all night, and I'm sick of pretending to care about these people. So, I'm going to ask you something that might sound crazy." Zariah blinked, not knowing what was about to happen. He grinned. "A little bit." That smile that people wear when they haven't smiled in a while and are feeling tense. "Will you go to the dance with me?" It took me a second to understand. She chuckled quietly, believing it was a joke. She told him, "I just asked you that an hour ago." "That's right," Lucian responded. "Now I'm asking you back, but not as a moment, as a choice. You showed me something that I forgot was important." Zoraya's heart skipped a beat. Her face turned red. For a moment, she forgot about the ballroom, the insults, the uniforms, and the walls that kept people like her and people like the women at table 7 apart. "Are you sure about this?" she inquired. "It's going to get a lot of attention." "Let them turn," he murmured, holding out his hand. "I don't dance for them." So she took it. And they all went back into the ballroom together. Everyone was watching them. People stopped talking. The murmurs came back, but this time they were louder, meaner, and more confusing. What is she doing with him? Is she one of the girls who work in entertainment? He must be drunk, or lonely, or both. Zoraya heard everything. Lucian did as well, but he clutched her hand even tighter. The music changed when they got to the middle of the dance floor. A smooth jazz song, well known. It's warm. And right there, under the lights that were meant for the affluent and polished, a waitress and a man with one arm danced like they were the only ones who counted. Because they were at that time. Sure, Zoraya had danced before at church picnics, in her kitchen with her mom, and in her bedroom with headphones on and bills all over the bed, but never like this. Never in a ballroom full of people who are judging you. Not under a chandelier that cost more than her mother's whole house. And never with a guy like Lucian Voss, for sure. He gripped her hand in a way that astonished her. Not strong, not fragile. Just, of course. The music was sluggish, the kind that made time seem to go by faster. The saxophone and piano blended together, smooth and thick like honey, like something from a Norah Jones record. First, Lucian stepped, sure of himself, calm. He was in charge without being in charge. His feet weren't flawless, but they were sure. It was like he wasn't dancing for fun. He was doing it to communicate a language his voice had long since forgotten. Zoraya followed, but not because she didn't know how to lead. She followed because, for the first time in her life, someone understood her. Not above, not below, but face to face. The hush around them dropped like snow. The rich and famous people who were there stopped drinking in the middle of their drinks. Mouths opened, brows up. Some people were confused. A few people thought it was funny. What about others? Completely upset. Lucian Voss, the famous wealthy hermit, was on the dance floor, but that wasn't all. It was the person he was dancing with. A waitress who was black. In a pressed uniform. With no nameplate and natural braids. The picture didn't make sense in a world where money was worth something. "Is this a statement of some kind?" said the wife of one donor. "Publicity stunt," someone said quietly behind their glass of champagne. But Lucian couldn't hear them, or maybe he did, and just didn't care. Zoraya was the only person in the room who mattered at the moment. She walked with light, graceful steps. It was like music rushed through her veins when she moved. She smiled because she wanted to, not because she had to, because this time she wasn't acting. She was alive. Lucian whispered softly, "You're a good dancer," and kept his eyes on hers. "You're not bad either," she said, teasingly. He laughed. "I'm not used to it." "You're doing well, especially for someone with only one arm." There it was, brave honesty, no sympathy, no doubt, only the truth, and it made him smile bigger than he had in months. "You know, most people don't want to talk about that," he remarked. "That's not me," she said. "I saw." They continued on going. Step, sway, and step. She put her hand lightly on his shoulder. He held her waist tightly but with respect. They didn't talk to each other for a while. They didn't have to. It wasn't talking. It was understanding that went between them. Silence that is shared. The kind of connection that doesn't yell or shine, but hums softly like a music you forgot you liked. The music changed. Still sluggish, but now it's deeper. A little more to the south. A little more real. Zoraya knew the song right away. "Al Green," she said softly. "Let's stay together." Lucian's eyebrows went up. You like the old stuff? She smiled. My mom taught me well. They moved in time, and their bodies fell into a natural rhythm. They didn't need a spotlight because they were already in the spotlight. The mood in the room had changed. Not only were people watching, they were also feeling something. Something that isn't familiar. Something that made them feel bad in a way they couldn't put into words. Because what they witnessed wasn't a scandal. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't a revolt. It was people. Clean and unfiltered. A person with $1 billion. Someone who has lost a limb. A server. A woman of color. They danced like the world hadn't told them 1,000 times that they didn't belong together. Lucian leaned in a little and spoke in a voice that was just above a whisper. You are probably the most brave person I've ever met. Zaraya turned her head. Why is that? Because you didn't wait for anyone to say it was okay. She stopped, her heart racing. No one had ever expressed it that way before. Neither did you, she said. Then they started to dance. Not for the people, not for the cameras, but just for themselves. For every time they had to swallow their pride. For every time someone told them no. For every stereotype, label, and assumption that tried to define them. This was more than just a dance. It was a statement. The music has stopped. The applause, if you could call it that, was weak and dispersed. Most of the guests didn't clap. They talked in low voices, pointed, and made judgments. Some people just left because they couldn't handle what they had seen. Zaraya didn't care though. Lucian didn't either. They walked off the dance floor together, holding hands, and didn't pay attention to the looks that were getting stronger. The ballroom didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like it had won. Zaraya finally let out a breath in the staff hallway, away from the piercing tongues and chandeliers. What just happened? She said in a low voice. Lucian leaned against the wall and untied his tie with his free hand. We just gave Charleston something to talk about for the next 10 years. She gazed at him. He had eyes full of secrets and a presence that didn't ask for attention but got it. He didn't look shaken, but he also didn't smile. Do you wish you hadn't done it? She questioned. For a long second, he glanced at her. No, he responded. Do you? She didn't say anything, not because she didn't know, but because she did. And the truth made her afraid. In the ballroom, she had found something very rare, a moment of truth in a world full of masks. But reality had a terrible way of making beauty go away with repercussions. She had seen it before, the cost of going against the rules, especially for women who looked like her. And the price came quickly. When she got off work, her phone buzzed with a dozen messages, screenshots, chat rooms, thoughts. The video had already become very popular. Of course, someone had filmed the dance. Only 30 seconds. Enough to start a frenzy on social media. Who is the waitress with Lucien Voss? Was this planned? CEO dances with hotel staff cute or wrong? One-armed billionaire dances with Black Cinderella. Zaraya's Instagram inbox was full of inquiries. Some type, some no. She read a few before putting the phone down. Lucian said, "Are you okay?" When they got to the loading dock. Zaraya shrugged. Depends on how tomorrow goes. Lucian gazed at her, but his face was blank. Then he pulled a small silver card out of his coat pocket and gave it to her. His own business card. One that she knew few people would ever see. Whatever happens next, call me. I'll help if things get messy. She accepted the card, looked at it, and then looked him in the eye. Why me? He didn't even blink. You didn't look at me like I was broken. That hurt her more than she thought it would. Nobody ever said that about him. About how weak he is. The arm that is missing. The loneliness. The quiet. She had spent so much time protecting herself that she didn't even realize she had done the same for him. Charleston was buzzing the next morning. The news in the area caught up the video. Then a nationwide news source. Then two. CNN's trending page had it by noon. People wanted to know. Was it romantic? Politics? Planned? By accident? Lucien Voss, a millionaire with a software business and a sad past, suddenly had a new limelight. Next to him was a black waitress, whose name no one could spell. Things got tense again at the motel. Zaraya's boss asked her to come into the office, closed the door, lowered the shades. He said, We need to talk. She thought, here it comes. He said, you're not in trouble. But the company is watching, and they don't like being in the news. She didn't say anything. People are asking questions about your job, about how you act, about your relationship with Mr. Voss. She answered hastily, there is no relationship. We danced, that's all. He didn't push, but the tone was clear. Be careful, be quiet, stay small. Lucian called later that night. Are you still alive? He inquired. Mostly, she responded, sitting on her couch with her knees pulled up to her chest and still in her work jeans. Good, I think we need to talk, not just about what happened, but also about what comes next. Zariah thought for a moment. Then he nodded, even if he couldn't see it. I'm paying attention. Zariah didn't want to see him again. Not that soon. Not after all the public attention and private worry that came following their dance. She thought it had been a moment, a wonderful, incredible, unforgettable moment, and moments like that didn't come in pairs. So when she came into Café Darrow the next morning, all she wanted was a quiet cup of coffee and maybe a cinnamon biscuit if they had any left. The cafe, which was off King Street near the old church, was her safe place. Most of the regulars were students or retirees, people who didn't care about the news or hidden cameras. She was still half asleep, with her hoodie pulled low and her eyes puffy from not getting enough sleep and thinking too much. There he was, Lucian Voss, sitting at a table in the back corner, reading a newspaper like it was 1999, and drinking something out of a basic white mug. No group of people, no protection, just him. He looked up, and their eyes met, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. You are late, he said. Zariah blinked. Excuse me? He pointed to the empty chair across from him and added, I've been saving you a seat. You want coffee? Did you plan this? She asked, going gently over. I hoped, he said. You said this was your place. I thought that if I showed up, fate would take care of the rest. She looked at him, this man who had every reason to be remote, guarded, and untouchable. And yet, here he was, waiting for her in a cafe that presumably offered more sweet tea than stock tips. Zariah sat down and wrapped her hands around the warm mug he gave her. It was coffee with no cream. No cream, no sweetener. Just like she usually did. You remembered, she responded, sounding a little astonished. Lucian said, I remember most things that are important. They were quiet for a bit, with the sound of silverware clinking and soft jazz playing in the background. There was still some tension in the air from the night before, but it felt different now. Not as much like terror, more like possible. Zariah ultimately commented, I didn't think the internet would care so much about two people dancing. Lucian remarked, it wasn't just two people. That was you and me. Two persons who weren't supposed to be in the same narrative. You mean a waitress and a rich person? I mean a black woman and a man who is broken. That's what they think. Zariah lifted an eyebrow and stared at him. You're not broken. I believe that on some days, he said, his voice lower now. And then there are days when I see people looking at the empty sleeve, and I wonder if they see my missing arm or my missing worth first. She stretched across the table and touched his wrist with her fingertips. She whispered softly, You don't owe the world your pain. And you don't have to say you're sorry for living. Lucian looked at her as he had never seen her before, an unusual object. You talk like someone who's carried a lot, he replied. I've carried a lot, she said. But no one has ever helped me hold it, not really. Another break, another quiet that felt more like a bridge than a wall. Lucian folded his paper and added, You know, I was thinking about doing something stupid. Zariah raised an eyebrow. Explain what reckless means. A good date, one that doesn't have uniforms or paparazzi. She blinked. Mr. Voss, are you asking me out? I'm asking if you want to be seen with me. During the day, on purpose. Zariah smiled, but there was something deeper behind it. Doubt, realism, and all the norms she had been taught to follow. You know what that's going to look like, right? I'm not really the top choice for arm candy in society. Lucian said, I'm not looking for candy. I'm looking for real. She leaned back in her chair and let his words sink in like honey in sweet tea. Okay, she said, one condition. Say it. You take me to a place where no one cares who you are, or who I am. Just people being people. He smiled. I know a place. Zariah knew the murmurs would come. She just didn't know how loud they would be. The night following her second meeting with Lucian, which was an unexpected coffee date that seemed more real than anything else she had done in years, she got onto her social media and saw the storm coming. It began little. A picture that isn't clear. Two shadowy figures in a cafe. One was wearing a hoodie, and the other was clearly Lucian Voss. Someone must have known him. The caption said, "Wait, is this the Lucian Voss? Who's the girl?" It wasn't just a hazy picture by dawn. The screenshots were next to each other. Her face from the dance, her face in the cafe, Instagram of hers, her job posting on the hotel's LinkedIn profile. And then there were the hashtags. Number Voss Mystery Girl. Number Waitress in the Wealth. Number One-Arm Billionaire. Number Black Cinderella. It was the same as always on the internet. It made up stories from bits and pieces. Some individuals thought it was a fairy tale come to life, not so much for others. Hundreds of comments came in. Let's be honest, she's only doing it for the money. She probably planned the whole thing. That's what strategic dating is all about. He lost an arm and, clearly, his standards. She's using race to get rich. It's a PR stunt. Zariah read the sentences in quiet, and each one was like a small cut that bled more than the last. She had been judged before. As a dark-skinned kid in the South, she learned early on that people would always have something to say about her skin, hair, smile, and even her quiet. But this was not the same. This was worldwide. And that was mean. The worst aspect wasn't the people she didn't know. She knew the people. People she went to high school with liked tweets that were suspicious. A cousin said on a gossip blog, "She always thought she was better than us." Her boss at the motel even changed. Zariah's shifts were no longer constant. Her schedule changed. She heard others talking in the employee locker room about her new lifestyle, or whether she would retire soon and marry rich. It made every room feel colder. But Lucian didn't move. When she called him one night crying and said, "I didn't ask for any of this," he just said, "I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't want us to become content," she said quietly. He said, "We didn't. We turned into a threat. That's not the same." A threat to whom? To the idea that people like us shouldn't be together. There was no sound on the line, the kind of quiet that spoke more than words ever could. He stopped for a moment, then said, "I wouldn't want you to keep seeing me if this hurts too much. But we'll get through it if you're still with me." "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she murmured in a voice that was just above a whisper. He answered softly, "You already showed you are. You just forgot." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared out the window of her apartment at the dark Charleston skyline. Lucian was still Lucian somewhere out there, unbothered, unreadable, and yet strangely completely on her side. The next day, she went back to work. Raise your chin, steps more stable. A few guests knew who she was and took pictures behind napkins while pretending to go through their phones. One elderly woman said quietly, "You're the girl from that dance video, right?" Zariah smiled in a courteous way. "Yes, ma'am." The woman looked her up and down and said, "Well, I hope it works out. Men like that don't generally stay." Zariah didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She had lived with whispers her whole life. And now, she was done making herself smaller for other people. Lucian had stayed away from microphones for much of his adult life. Not because he was afraid, not because he didn't know how to take charge of a room, but the less people who knew about him, the less power they had to change his story. That plan had worked up until now, because it felt like he was betraying her as the woman he loved was being ripped apart online. Zariah never told him to protect her. She didn't think a man like him would do more than just show up. But Lucian had been watching her name trend for a week and seeing people tear apart her appearance as if she were just a headline in heels. And it was enough. Forbes called for a remark, expecting the typical no response from Voss Enterprises. Lucian did something he hadn't done in years. He agreed. They have a sophisticated podcast studio in New York City. He answered with a simple video call from his workplace in Charleston. There was no tie on him. There is no PR in sight. Just a navy blue sweater and the same look that had once made boardrooms shake. Calm, cool, and completely clear. The host greeted him, partially anticipating a nicely planned PR moment. Instead, they got Lucian. He started off casually, saying, "Let's talk about the elephant in the feed. Yes, I did go to a dance. Yes, I did dance with a woman. Yes, she works as a waiter. And sure, she is the most amazing person I've encountered in a long time." The host blinked, not sure what to say. Lucian leaned forward a little, but he never took his eyes off the camera. "But let me ask you something," he said. "Why does her job bother you more than my missing arm?" The quiet on the other end was so loud it hurt. He didn't wait. "People have spoken bad things about her. Gold digger. A person who takes advantage of opportunities. People say she's only playing, but no one asks me. Not once. Why? Because I have cash? Because I'm a guy? Or because losing an arm makes me seem hurt, which, not guilty?" He shook his head slowly. You see, Zariah didn't want this kind of attention. She didn't tell anyone about a story or share a picture of herself. She was there. She observed a man who was by himself. And she asked him to dance. He let that sit for a while. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know anything about my business, my financial account, or the problems that come with dating someone like me. She recently saw a man who seemed sad. And that's something the world isn't used to anymore. Caring for others without wanting something in return. The host cleared her throat in an attempt to get the talk back on track, but Lucian wasn't finished. "I've worked hard for years to build a name that opens doors, pays for research, and changes lives. But none of it matters if we still see people as tails instead than souls." He stopped for a while to let the weight of his words sink in. "So no, I won't say I'm sorry for dancing with her. And I won't stay away to make shareholders feel better. Zariah Moore works as a waitress, and she's quite smart, courageous, fierce in ways that most people couldn't manage." Finally, he leaned back with his hands in front of him. "I'm the lucky one, if anything." Within hours, the interview was all over the internet. Everyone posted clips of Lucian's speech on all platforms. Twitter threads became short talks on TED. Hashtags went from being about scandal to being about support. Number, lucky one. Number, protect Zariah. Number, Lucian speaks. Number, hidden worth. Even the most cynical people stopped talking. Because Lucian hadn't just said something. He had come, for a woman who had never asked him to, in his own name and with his own voice. Zariah sat on the floor of her apartment that night with her legs crossed and her laptop lit up in the dark. She watched his video again, and her heart raced like it did the first time. He had done it. Not for clicks, not for power. For her. For real. She didn't shed a tear, not this time. She said one word to herself over and over again, like a prayer. Seen. The video by Lucian altered everything. But not everything changed. For every heart it touched, it also threatened another. The day following the interview, Zariah went outside her apartment and discovered a bunch of white roses on her doorstep. No message, just a small, kind gesture that no one knows about. A mural had sprouted overnight on the brick facade of a closed record store down the street. There were two shadows dancing in it. One has a stylish afro puff, and the other has a strong posture with only one arm. In big white letters at the bottom, it says, "Grace isn't a title. You have an option." Zariah snapped a picture and put it online without a caption. It was everywhere in just a few minutes. People all over the world were watching and reacting. There was a lot of affection on the bright side. People told their own stories of being criticized, looked down on, or treated badly because they didn't live up to expectations. A woman tweeted, "My husband drives a bus. I work as a neurosurgeon. People still ask me if I married down." Newsflash. Character isn't on a resume. A young man wrote on TikTok, "As a black handicapped veteran, seeing Lucian Voss honor that woman on camera, I have never felt so noticed. This is how to be a leader." Famous people also spoke up. A vocalist of R&B music posted Lucian's comment again and said it was the most romantic line of 2025. But not everyone was nice. Some news sites made Lucian's speech into a big deal. One headline said, "Is Lucian Voss risking his empire for love?" Another, "CEO uses sympathy to get what he wants. Billionaire's Waitress romance splits investors." Cable news hosts argued about whether Lucian was creating a dangerous precedent by being too personal in public. One financial guy with a stiff blazer said, "It's not about love, it's all about how things look. During a merger year, he's making himself more human. Good move." Zariah watched that video without sound. Her stomach turned. At the same time, things were still stressful at work. Some co-workers were more understanding and offered silent support in the kitchen or on the elevator. But some people became colder. Mr. Reed, her boss, called her into his office. He said, "You've been a distraction. This isn't a show about real life." She didn't back down. "I've always been on time for my shifts. This week, I've done 3 doubles." He said, "It's not about your schedule. It's all about how you see things. Guests pay attention." Zariah's cheeks got hot. "Notice what? That I'm happy to be working? That I didn't get smaller as the world grew loud?" He sighed, as if he was tired of her being there. "Maybe you should take a break for a few weeks, let things settle down." She left the office with her head held high, but she didn't come back the next day. When Lucian heard the news, he offered to help by getting her a job at one of his company's community centers, maybe something that would let her go up in the world. Zariah, on the other hand, shook her head. "If I take your hand now, they'll say everything they've been saying and more. I want to walk by myself." He didn't say anything, he only shook his head. Respect shone in his one look. Days went by. People reacted in a lot of different ways. There were a lot of arguments online. The word of the week was power imbalance. Feminists talked about whether Zariah was being used. Lucian was accused of virtue signaling by conservative groups. Lucian did something crazy again in the middle of it all. He put up a second video, although this one was shorter. It was only 1 sentence. "I don't have to defend her. She is her own force of nature. I'm just lucky to see the storm." That line, it went nuclear. It was quoted by poets. It was tweeted by athletes. Professors gave it to students in media studies classes. A rapper who won a Grammy used it as a hook in his following record. And very slowly, the tone changed again. Zariah was no longer the black waitress who was dating a billionaire. There was more to her. A woman who didn't move. A woman who bought her own heels and walked through fire in them. A woman who didn't only stand next to power, but became powerful in her own right. Zariah hadn't seen Lucian in person in 27 days. Not that she was keeping track. Yes, she was. In a quiet way. In her mind, there were job interviews, side jobs, and nights when the world was quiet enough for loneliness to speak up. She hadn't stopped him. They still sent each other texts, a check-in, a funny picture, a picture of something random that made someone think about something else. But there was room now, an area that seemed important, a place she made. Zariah needed to get back on her feet, no matter how good his intentions were. To learn more about her outside of the story the internet had made up about her. She worked shifts at a coffee shop on King Street that was independent, locally owned, and controlled by a Korean-American woman who hired her right away and didn't treat her like a walking headline. The owner winked and said, "You're a barista, not a brand." Zariah needed it so much. But it didn't mean she stopped thinking about him. Lucian Voss, a man with a mind that moves quickly, and a voice that sounds like thunder wrapped in satin. The man who danced with her in front of strangers, and then spoke up for her in front of the whole world. She wanted to see him. That's why her heart skipped when he texted her out of the blue on a Thursday afternoon with just 5 words. "Do you still like swing dancing, Z?" Zariah looked at the message, blinked, then she grinned. She didn't even think about it. "V, you still have 2 working feet." An hour later, she was outside the same community hall where they had first danced. The crisp Charleston air made her breath fog up, and she could feel a nervous beat in her ribs. When the doors opened, he was there. Lucian was pretty much the same. Still quite tall, still looking clean-cut in that easy way. He still had that calm energy that made spaces feel smaller when he walked in. But his eyes were softer. Maybe it was because she wasn't in a storm anymore. Or maybe it's because he never stopped seeing her through the storm. He said, "You came." "You asked," she said. He held out his arm. She accepted it. The room was full of music. There was nothing fancy, just an old-school jazz speaker and a few couples swaying along the back wall. At first, they didn't say anything, just relocated. Zariah effortlessly followed his lead, like it was second nature. Their bodies fell into sync, a beat made not just by their movements but also by everything they had been through and survived. He turned her around at one point. She laughed a much. It had been a while since he heard that sound. He kept her hands for a second longer than he needed to once the song was over. He whispered softly, "I miss you." Zariah looked at his face. "I've missed me too." He looked down. "I wasn't sure if I should text you. I didn't know if I would answer." A moment of stillness. He said, "I didn't want to be your savior. I just wanted to be there. As you needed." "You were," she said. "But I had to remember who I was before the world told me who I had to be." "And who is that?" "Who?" he asked. She grinned slowly and with confidence. "A lady who loves herself enough not to change for anyone. It's possible that she is with someone powerful, without going away." Lucian let out a sigh, like he had been holding it for a month. He said, "I don't want to be the most important thing in your life. Just someone who reminds you how bright your center already is." They were standing in the middle of the dance floor, with no music playing, only heartbeats and phrases that weren't finished. Then she said softly, "You still owe me a real meal." He raised an eyebrow. "One where I don't get confused with your Uber?" "Exactly." He nodded his head. "Okay, but you're the one who gets to choose the place." Zariah smiled. "Hope you like folding chairs and food trucks. I'd eat tacos in a parking lot if it meant I could sit across from you." That made her chuckle again, this time louder. The distance closed precisely like that. The quiet was broken, and the story they didn't know how to continue found its next part. In one place. It's not always easy to fall in love. For Zariah and Lucian, it was more like a twisting road with surprising curves, unmarked detours, and views that took their breath away. They didn't try to hurry. They already knew what happened when the world sought to speed up their story. They did the small things instead. People at the cafe near the harbor on Sunday mornings didn't care that she used to be a viral waitress or that he was a billionaire with a titanium arm. They were just Z and L, sharing a plate of banana nut pancakes and fighting over whether or not grits should be sweet or salty. For the record, Lucian was a big fan of cheddar grits. Zariah said it was a sin. They went to bookstores, and she read the first paragraph of every book she picked up out loud, giving voices for the characters. Lucian nodded along, acting like he was paying attention. He took her to indie jazz shows in secret clubs, and she took him to cookouts in her cousin's backyard, where uncles played dominoes and aunties danced like they were 20 years younger. Their charm came from the difference. He came from silence, order, and history. She comes from sound, spirit, and being alive. They somehow found a way to meet in the center. Of course, there were learning curves. Lucian had to understand that Zariah didn't need to be impressed. He once tried to take her to Napa for a casual wine sampling. She glanced at him and continued, "Sir, I have to go to work at the cafe and pay my rent on Friday." That was the finest way to ground him. Zariah then had to stop doing things that hurt her. Some days she wanted to push him away because she thought it couldn't be genuine. That one day he would wake up and recall she was the girl with the apron and the history. But Lucian never backed down. Not when she talked about the dad who left. Not when she said that after high school, she used to sleep in her car, work 2 jobs, and chase daydreams that barely paid the light bill. Gently once told her, "You're not broken," and then gently brushed her curls away from her face. "You've just been put together perfectly by experience." They sat on the hood of Lucian's car one night after a long walk through the peaceful streets of Charleston, looking out at the river. The sky was big and dark, with stars all over it, the kind of night that made everything else seem insignificant. Zariah interrupted the quiet. "Do you ever feel Afraid? He stared at her. He answered, all the time. But I've learned that fear doesn't mean stop. It only means to pay attention. She nodded and let that sink in. Sometimes I'm afraid you'll stop seeing me the way you do now. Lucian looked at her seriously. I'll never stop seeing you. Things could change in the world. Our paths could bend. But how I view you, that's chiseled in. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to trust him. And at that moment, she did. They made routines as fall went toward winter. They cut pumpkins, casseroles that had burned. Zariah dubbed the rescue dog Crouton because she said he had the vitality of a bread cube. They fought over space in the cabinets and the TV remotes. They kissed in the glow of fairy lights. They told each other their dreams in quiet voices during long nights. Lucian didn't have to save Zariah. She had already saved herself a long time before he got there. But he gave her something she never thought she would get: permission to be soft, to not always know the solution, to cry without saying sorry, to love without a safety net. And Lucian, with all his might and polish, finally met someone who could see through the armor, who didn't treat him like a brand or a headline. She clasped his scarred hand without flinching. She made fun of the playlists he had made. She told him that money didn't make him full, love did. Their love wasn't ideal, but it was true. Not from fairy tales, but from faith, decision, and being there every day. And they both decided that was the kind of love that was worth dancing for. A year. It had been exactly 1 year when Zariah, with shaking hands and a brave grin, asked a one-armed man no one knew to dance. The night that everyone talked about. The night that changed everything for them. Now, she was at the same community gala, but this time she wasn't a waiter. Not in flats and an apron, carrying plates of expensive appetizers. But she wore a silky emerald green dress that fit her like it was fashioned just for her. She twisted her locks up high, letting a few strands fall softly over her face. The gold earrings sparkled on her skin. Confidence held her tighter than the clothing did. And what about Lucian? He wore a black suit that fit him well and a dark green tie that went with hers. But he wore peace more than that. There was no longer a glove over his titanium prosthetic. It shone brightly in the light of the chandelier, bold and unashamed. They strolled in together, holding hands. And this time, everyone knew who they were. No talking, no second looks. There were just cameras flashing, heads nodding in admiration, and a few jaws dropping. No one thought that the erstwhile mystery man was Lucien Voss, the tech billionaire who had since officially stepped down from his company to work on humanitarian causes and mental health advocacy for veterans. No one thought Zariah Tay, who used to be a black waitress who danced with a CEO, would become a speaker, mentor, and creator of the nonprofit Second Chance Stories, which helps young women of color get scholarships, housing, and assistance after they have been through hard times. She didn't do it for the media. She did it for the girls who had no one to tell them they were important. And tonight, they were honoring her. The MC tapped the mic, and the gathering got quiet. Our next honoree is someone who reminds us that worth isn't something you buy, it's something you carry. Please welcome Zariah Tay. There was a lot of applause. Before she went up on stage, Lucian squeezed her hand. She stood at the podium, took a breath, and looked around the room. She would have given in to the pressure a year ago. She stood tall tonight. I used to serve drinks in this very hall, she said, and a warm smile spread across her face. I remember every table, every rude comment, and every tip that told me more about a person than their wallet ever could. Laughter flowed through the air, nods of heads. And I recall the night when someone looked at me and didn't see just a waiter. He didn't perceive a stereotype. He looked at me. Her voice shook a little, but she didn't crack. You all know what happened, but you don't know what happened next. The work, the therapy, and the process of unlearning all I had been taught about what I did or didn't deserve. She stopped for a moment and looked around till she saw Lucian. He smiled, proud of himself. I am not here because I got lucky. I am here because I believed in myself before anyone else did. And because one person had the guts to dance with me when no one else would. More applause. This time, louder. After the ceremony, couples went back to the dance floor. There was beautiful music playing under the crystal lights. Lucian smiled and held out his hand. "Miss Tay, can I have this dance?" She chuckled and shook her head in a fun way. "Still the same lines after a year?" He moved closer. "Still the same woman who made me say them." They danced to a vintage Otis Redding song, moving slowly to the beat. It wasn't about the stairs. It was all about being there. About all they had built together, painstakingly and on purpose. Guests watched them, but not in the same manner they had the year before. Not with inquiry or judgment, but with respect. The kind of silence that many wish they had the guts to live in. "Do you wish you hadn't said yes?" Lucian asked in a quiet whisper in her ear. Zariah pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. "Not for a second. But I really wish I had taken your fries that first night." He laughed. "There's always tonight." They danced till the music stopped and the lights went out. And when they left the party, fingers intertwined, the cameras followed, but they didn't care. Because suddenly they weren't in the news. They weren't a controversy or a big deal. They were a tale. One that had just started. Not every narrative that begins in the dark ends in the light. But some do. It wasn't a dance for Zariah and Lucian on their voyage. It wasn't even about the billionaire, the waitress, or the video moment that went viral. It was about something much more important. Something that gets lost in the noise of this world too often. Dignity. You see, prestige doesn't give you dignity, and uniforms don't take it away. It doesn't come from a bank account or a last name. It lives in how you treat other people. In the way you act even when no one is watching, especially when no one is looking. People ignored, misjudged, and mistreated Zariah for years, not just once. She learned how to smile even when people were being rude to her, and how to keep her head up while the world tried to push her down. And what about Lucian? He knew what it was like to be invisible in a different way. Even though he had billions, people knew his name, how much money he had, and how much power he had. But they couldn't see the scars, the hurt, the man who had lost so much more than an arm. People who still judge people by their looks thought their love tale would never happen. But it did. And that's what gives it strength. Because it reminds us of something we all need to hear. The world doesn't know who you are. You can be whoever you want to be. Zariah may have taken the labels. She could have kept little, quiet, and safe. But she chose to expose her heart instead. She took a risk. She had faith in something better. Not because she was convinced it would succeed, but because she was confident she was worth the risk. Lucian could have stayed behind glass doors, could have stayed safe, loved, and alone. But he didn't. He decided to go, to become involved, to love out loud, even if it meant giving up the safety of being anonymous. They both questioned the story. They made people stop and think about things. Is it possible for a waitress and a CEO to fall in love? Is it possible for a black lady from a working-class upbringing to be worthy of popular admiration without being perfect? Can a man with an obvious impairment be considered as attractive, strong, and complete? Of course, the answer is yes. Yes to love that doesn't need permission. Yes to respect that doesn't depend on job titles. Yes, we should see the person before the stereotype. That's why we're discussing this tale on hidden worth today. Too many of us think that the labels we wear are all that make us important. A lot of us have been told that we have to change who we are to get love, respect, or even happiness. But you don't have to change who you are. You only need to be. Be nice, be interested, have the courage to look at others and let them look at you back. So, the next time you see someone in a uniform, don't think you know what they're going through. When you feel bad about your situation, remember that it's simply a chapter in your life. They aren't your full novel. And if you've ever been Zariah, the one who was glanced over, spoken about, and doubted, I hope you know that those who matter recognize how valuable you are. People who matter will see you, like Lucian did. And if you've ever been Lucian, the one people want to be but never understand, I hope you meet someone who loves all of you, not just the good parts. Because true love, the sort that lasts, seldom starts out perfect. It starts with being there, with choice, with a dance in the dark. Please share this tale if it made you feel something. Not because we need views, but because someone out there might need to be reminded that they are good enough just the way they are. You've been watching Hidden Worth, where we tell genuine stories that honor hidden beauty, quiet strength, and the surprising connections that may change lives. If you believe in love that goes beyond what you anticipate, dignity that goes beyond titles, and stories that give you hope, subscribe now and help us change the story. And before you leave, have you ever experienced a time when someone else saw your worth when you didn't? Or have you ever glimpsed someone's secret strength and known they were more than what you saw? Let us know in the comments. We read them all. Someone else might have a breakthrough because of your tale. Until next time, keep looking for the good, keep moving to the music, and always remember that your worth was never supposed to be hidden.